I just want to start with some guidelines for discussion that I use with my students while you're writing in the chat. I got this set of guidelines from my colleague, Associate Dean Colette Can, who's done a lot of work on dialogue at the University of Michigan. So the acronym is ASPIRE, and A stands for assuming that people have good reasons for what they have to say. And at the same time, it's important that everybody acknowledges the impact that their words have on other people. S stands for people speaking one at a time, making room and taking room, as we say at USF, step up, step back. P, participating with an open mind and being willing to take different perspectives. I is for using I statements. R is about respecting confidentiality and taking risks. E is escuchar in Spanish, means to listen. We want to listen to understand other people and also have empathy with ourselves and with others. So, as I was saying, I've been very influenced with what's been going on in the United States since I got back from conducting my research. And over the last 16 months, we have confronted one crisis after another. So there's the pandemic and all the controversies that has raised for us. There was the murder of George Floyd a little over a year ago, and the racial justice uprisings across the country that came out of that. And then there was the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. So there are so many controversial questions that have emerged from all of this. And I think it's made us educators all aware that teaching controversial issues is more urgent than ever. And at the same time, as Lee was referring to earlier, it's probably more scary than it ever has been before because of all the controversies that are swirling around the nation and the globe. What's happening in the education space also contributes to this urgency and anxiety. So there are a number of state legislatures in Republican-dominated states in the US that have been pushing legislation against anti-racist curriculum. They're using the term critical race theory to sort of rally their troops. And teachers had a day of action on this past Saturday to push back, but this is an ongoing controversy over the curriculum. So why teach controversial issues, especially at this moment? We know from research that discussion of controversial issues in an open classroom climate leads to increased political knowledge, interest, engagement, and efficacy among young people. Those studies are both in the US and international. Living with Controversy is a document that was created through the Council of Europe about 6 years ago that gets into the rationales for teaching controversial issues and provides lots of practical and conceptual tools for doing that work. And then most recently, the National Academy of Education in the US came out with a major report based on lots and lots of research, interdisciplinary research on educating for civic reasoning and discourse. So although teaching controversial issues has its home in social studies education and citizenship education primarily, it's really being picked up by other disciplines as well. So I'll tell you a little bit about the research project that I conducted. So, there's a lot of really great scholarship on teaching controversial issues that's been done internationally, but there was virtually no research on how teacher educators prepare their pre-service teachers to do this really important work. So I decided to study 4 teacher educators and their pre-service teachers located at 4 universities in 3 different countries, 2 in Northern Ireland, 1 in England, 1 in the Midwest. I started my study just a few months after the Brexit vote, and the work was funded by the Spencer Foundation. And what I did was I went over to your side of the pond twice during the academic year, and then I was in the Midwest twice as well here in the US. I was a participant observer in methods courses taught by the 4 teacher educators. So I sat in on their classes. I did a series of 3 interviews with each of the teacher educators and 15 pre-service teachers over the course of more than a year, because I wanted to follow the pre-service teachers through their school placements. And I collected lots of documents, including course materials, program descriptions, student teaching lessons, and course assignments. And out of all this data analysis, I developed 2 grounded theories. One I call contained risk taking, which I'll talk about in a moment. And the other is called adaptive uptake of pedagogical tools, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So the theory of contained risk taking. Basically what I found across the 4 teacher educators is that, in these very polarized locations, they encouraged their pre-service teachers to explore controversial issues with their students. And they provided them with lots of tools for doing it in many different ways. But at the same time, they taught a set of strategies for containing the risks that can accompany teaching controversial issues. So we know from research and our own experience that teachers can be very anxious about potential conflict in the classroom, inflammatory speech among students, and then recriminations from parents and sanctions from administrators, especially in really contentious political times. And so across these 4 teacher educators, I identified 4 different strategies that they taught for doing this work, but at the same time, doing it in ways that protected teachers and students and were really thoughtful and reflective and well-informed and pragmatic at the same time. So these strategies are cultivating a supportive environment, preparing thoroughly, thinking through teachers' stance on the issues, communicating proactively with students, parents, and administrators, selecting authentic issues and framing them in thoughtful ways, choosing resources and pedagogies that challenge assumptions and include diverse voices and perspectives, guiding discussion in fruitful directions, and addressing emotions. So we're going to get into 2 of these strategies in some more depth. And the first one is selecting authentic issues. So it's really important. I think there's a lot of confusion because there are so many controversies swirling around in society these days. It's really important to go back to some scholarship to define, well, what is a controversial issue in terms of what we would even think about bringing to the classroom? So I go back to Stradling, Nocter, and Baines, who defined controversial issues as those problems and disputes that divide society and for which significant groups within society offer conflicting explanations and solutions based on alternative values. So for example, how should COVID vaccines be distributed? Controversial issue. Who has the strongest claim to the land that is now Israel and Palestine? Diana Hess, in her book, Controversy in the Classroom, defined controversial political issues as questions of public policy that spark significant disagreement. So in the US this past spring, there was so much controversy right here in Berkeley about the question, should schools reopen and under what conditions? And then Stuart Foster defined controversial issues in history, in the discipline of history, as sensitive questions related to contested histories. So for example, who is responsible for the Rwandan genocide would be a controversial issue in history. I think part of the confusion that's going on these days is conflating topics with issues. So I'm going to suggest that we think about issues in terms of open questions that we want students to explore from multiple perspectives. So a topic would be racism, and that can be very controversial. But what we want to bring to the classroom as a controversial question might be something like, when and how should racist speech be censored? Another controversial topic is policing. A question that we might bring is, should police departments be defunded? A third controversial topic is the coronavirus, but a specific question would be, when should restrictions be lifted? Another topic is refugees. We might pose the question, what is a fair refugee policy? And then feel free to put ideas about this last topic, environmental justice, in the chat box. What would be a good controversial question to bring to the classroom that you would want students to explore about environmental justice? So going even deeper into framing controversial issues for the classroom, we really need to think about what's an open issue versus a settled issue. And this gets very, very controversial. There's a lot of disagreement about this. Hess wrote about this in her book, Controversy in the Classroom, as well. So it's a major contribution of her work. So open questions have multiple competing and reasonable views to explore. They have not been decided. Students should draw their own conclusions. And an example would be, should schools punish students for cyberbullying that happens off campus? So there are reasonable views on either side of that debate. A settled question would be, should women have the right to vote? That was settled a century ago. It may have been a settled question, may have been open in the past, but it's been settled by law, consensus, scientific research, etc. And there are questions that may be open or settled depending on the context, right? So the question, should students be allowed to wear religious symbols at school? I think in France, that's very controversial. In the US, in most contexts, that would not be controversial. So it's really important to think about, what we think of as open versus settled and what is really contextual depending on where the school is located and what kind of school it is.